So utilitarian design really isn't a buzzword like usability is. This is not something which is known in the field as utilitarian design, but rather that thinking about the purpose of a publication, the purpose of whatever the communication is, how do you design and structure and represent whatever it is you're doing to fulfill the purpose, to solve the problem, which I mentioned earlier in the course, the problem of the book, the problem of the website, the problem of the quiz, the problem of the whatever, and how do you think about the options that people may need to have to be able to solve the problem themselves, or to easily understand what it is what the purpose of whatever it is concerned. As I said at the beginning, we don't yet have a firm vocabulary. One of the sort of move away from it slightly. A multimedia vocabulary yet. We don't look at something and know exactly what that means. Sometimes it may mean play this video. Sometimes that little right arrow is play the audio. Sometimes it means move to the next thing. But we're really talking about design as plumbing in this case, and plumbers have standards that they use to connect things, and and that's the thing that that a 5/16 goes into a 5/16 or whatever that it might be, and we are not yet at that stage in terms of information design, ebook design, the utility of those systems at this point. So. I often will look at it in this sort of what's the minimum set of tools needed to communicate the nature of the ebook. Should it be should multimedia be included? Should there be an audio overlay? Should there be but all of these things have to be considered in the overall structure of what the communication product is, and therefore, as a publisher, what we can afford to spend in terms of time, money, and outlay.
Yeah, and in my experience, I've found that there are people who are very keen on usability, but don't really have a sense of the utility. The utilitarian considerations aren't there, and I think it's one of the important things about having the right kind of team. You need to have people who are not just on the UI team, but you need to have people who are truly advocates for the user and understand what the purpose is.
Yes. When I was moving somebody from being in the production stream to being a designer, it was sort of part of a shift we were making. She had natural aesthetics. We wanted to make sure she had classes to help her learn Photoshop skills and those kinds of things. But I was sort of shifting her from one position to another, and I said, I need to be really clear about what you need to do to be able to work in the kind of design, the iterative, constantly changing of the designs as that we were trying to work toward. But are you willing to kill off your babies? You have to not have your ego bound up in a particular design. We had an experience a few years before where somebody, was just like so passionate about some button being blue that she sort of melted down when that wasn't accepted. Anyway, so designers aren't always able to be utilitarian is the point of that story.
Yeah.
And so that having a team that understands that nobody's babies are sacrosanct, that utility may be implemented in a different way, that a particular button doesn't need to look a certain way, a look and feel doesn't have to stay that way, that you can have templates that you exchange, and that it is a team approach. Yeah. In the service of the whatever the narrative line is. And that's one of those things that in earlier conversations before we started recording, we were talking about, which is that there are rules that apply to visual art, and to the narrative art, writing, that apply to design, that apply to good engineering, which is about only in keeping the stuff that really
Hmm.
does the job that's in question,
Hmm. Yep.
moves the story forward.
Yep. It's easy to think about utility when you're talking about a website or an app because that we expect that to be something that's supposed to do something for us. Do you see elements of utilitarian design in print books? Uh,
Well, certainly you see a difference in design between paperbacks and hardbacks,
yeah.
for example, and that's because the paperback is the more utilitarian,
Yep.
and the business models are very different with a
Hmm.
paperback, a trade paperback,
Yep.
than with a hardback, for
Yep.
example.
Yep.
What were you thinking about when you
Well, I'm
were?
just thinking of since I spent some time looking at my bookshelf last night. Uh, I've come across a couple of things that strike me as people who won on utility rather than just on standard book designers. I have an old copy of my White Mountain Guide, uh, just a little book for hikers who are going through the White Mountains in the Northeast United States.
Right,
But
right,
it was great. It was sort of an orange cover, looked looked pretty terrible, but it had maps folded inside. So really ingenious production. Very thin paper, not durable, but kind of the waterproof outside. It was long and short. It could fit into a book pack or to a cargo type pocket.
right.
So I said, yeah, this was designed by somebody who actually hiked. This was good. This was utilitarian.
Mm-hmm.
I also
Right.
came across my dictionary, which has those thumb tabs,
Those
right?
cutouts.
Yeah, a
Yes, right.
great a great bit. So the usability, utility, but I'd say it's usability in service of enhancing the utility of the book. So
Right.
yeah, I think though we're more concerned about it with online because it's interactive with us. We've gone to it with a particular task. We go to books with tasks, and you've talked about that throughout the course about the purpose of the
Mm-hmm.
book.
Right.
So it may be harder to see in books because we tend to see them just as these static blocks that are sitting on our bookshelf. But I think there's a lot of utilitarian design in books.
But there's also when utility can be matched with elegance, that's what you are
Right.
really striving for, and
Yeah.
that's the goal. Is to manage to be elegant and graceful and wonderful as well as utility, having utility.
Great.
So elegance is something which we recognize as humans, and doesn't have to do with cost or class or any of those sort of things, but it has to do with um, the quality that's being communicated. Rarely does elegance. It seems to me these are some of the things that we talked about. Elegance doesn't call attention to itself. If somebody is swaggering around, you know that they're compensating. If somebody is being overly precious, they're trying too hard. If they're it's understated. Elegance is understated, and so good design should be understated and not garish. But when you then look at the design more closely, I'm sort of imagining somebody who is an elegant dresser. If you look more closely, those things actually do tie together even more than you thought they did on first glance. And the same thing could be true about a good visual design for a product.
And it also is one of the traps. I think when people go in search of elegance, they tend to overdress. They overdress
Right.
their websites. You take a look at all the Chrome that's on a lot of websites, and I use Chrome. That's sort of a geeky term, but it's
Hmm.
just referring to the unnecessary stuff. The cars of the 50s or 60s had all that chrome on them that now seems to date them and looks out of place. But it's you know designer 101. You should be told to restrain yourself.
That's right. Well, and interestingly, the thing about that you were talking about with cars is the case with almost all media products, everything else during the sort of the new when it seems new and wonderful. People try to do way too much with the new options they had. Chrome was a process that was made much cheaper, as my recollection, during during the Second World War, and so suddenly they could do it on anything, and so did. And if you look at back when word processing first started happening, and then desktop publishing, once people got control of fonts for the first time, they didn't, there was no elegance involved. It was, "Hi, Mom." Little tiny words, and then big,
Yeah.
big bolds and bold
Right.
italic underline, and
Hmm.
it was something remarkable. And that was, to some extent, a celebration of a technology, a celebration of a capability, and elegance doesn't celebrate a technology; it applies it, it
Hmm.
enlists it, it uses it, and that's a very different thing than saying, "Look at me, look at me, look at me now."
Right.
Do you like my party hat?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Whatever happened to the blank tag? That used to be
yeah,
part of the HTML
yes, yeah,
vocabulary.
quite literally. It was no, it was
Yes.
part of Netscape. It wasn't part of the original
Okay.
HTML. It was Netscape, and Internet Explorer had something else that would let text blink.
Yeah.
But yes, right.
Yeah.
Or animated GIFs were really cool for a while, and they got really tired, and then they got cool again. So,
Yeah. I think they're cool
um,
again. But
yeah, that's right.
yeah, and thinking about things that are coming on now, I think elegance has become more important on the web. It seems to me that there's a move towards simplicity and thoughtful use of fonts, and
Mhm.
some of the readings this week will point in that direction. I use something in the browser. It, it if you have Safari, you've got a reader option now, and what Reader does is to strip away all the Chrome on a page and give you just the article content in a much larger and more attractive font.
Wow, wow, that's
So,
cool.
yeah, and if you have Safari, you can get the Reader. If you update Safari, you'll see the Reader tag, and there are options for um, the browser Chrome as well. And it's nice. I think it says something about the value that readers are placing on elegance and their appreciation of it. And it should also say something to publishers who are creating those pages, because if your users are looking at a way of getting rid of the crud on your page,
That's
that's
an
some kind of
indicator. Yeah.
feedback.
Yes, indeed.
You know,
I wonder
so
if there's some way to specifically record that information, whether somebody switches to Reader, because that would certainly be worthwhile.
yeah.
Elegance is also has to do with a very quickly understandable purpose, and what I've always called the symphony effect. That the symphony is more than just the individual instruments. It's the instruments playing in synchrony and in harmony and in creating something more than just what they are. And that's true with the best design. Is it has a wholeness and a coherence, where each part enhances the other. So if there's ways to do that, then
Mm-hmm.
um, now this is mostly about visual design, but not exclusively. Also, is about the ways in which you're presenting, the order that stuff comes in, the media that you're using, and the ways in which you meld and mix the media that you have at your disposal.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'm trying to think of a site that I regard as particularly elegant. I don't have that right now, but I'll ask you, Michael. Do you have something that?
Oh, a site that is particularly
Yeah, I mean,
elegant.
or a
Wow.
tool, something that has that symphony effect where the parts seem to just come together and each one supports the others.
Well, I've found that I am missing Photoshop, not because um, well, I don't have it on my machine, and it's one of those tools that it took a while for me to get accustomed to it. But once I did, then the symphony became apparent. The further I went, the more sense it made. And that was an interesting software application for that reason. But mostly, I have not. That's not really a site. That's a
Yeah,
software package.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I was going to suggest one of the tools that is probably lowest in, well, I won't say lowest in usability. It has one of the toughest learning curves. But there's the editor we talked about yesterday, Emacs,
Hmm.
that people either love or hate. But for me, it is something where all the parts come together to create an incredibly powerful package.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
spend uh, my entire online day inside Emacs and not ever have to go out. So for me, that just validates the notion that, yeah, everything sort of plays together, everything makes everything else more powerful. But it probably would fail on many usability tests. And,
Right. Yes.
I think there is, go back to the usability for a second, there's this notion that things can be usable initially. So there's a very short learning curve, but when you get to
Right.
more complicated tasks, they may have more of a burden on you. So usability is kind of a point in time
Yeah.
measure as well.
Right. Right.
But elegance is elegance. So
Wow. And I would never say that Emacs is visually elegant, but the fact that you can tell it to do anything you want it to, and
yes,
then it'll remember, is a kind of elegance too.
yes,
So you're a geek at heart. It's just the way it is,
it's
and
the way it
of
is.
course I am too. And part of that sort of reality is that you want to have control over the little microenvironment that you're working on. You want to understand the working parts. You want to be able to deconstruct and reconstruct these things, and that's the kind of information density that I have sort of always fallen toward in a way that meant that an awful lot of the things that I thought were cool, 99% of the world would not. And that's sort of the nature of things, and that's just fine. But it's partly because of the density of possibilities that Emacs represents that it is an elegance for you, because that elegance has to do with the locus of control, the ways in which you can grapple with the pieces,
Mm-hmm.
the way you can make it present itself in the formats that you want, all that kind of stuff, and that's part of the information design as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about visual design; it's
Right.
also about making sure that you don't either have that you have the right balance. One of the things you said a moment ago has to do with the initial comprehensibility of something as opposed to the secondary and tertiary. There were certain things in Photoshop that I could do right away. I was like, "Oh, this is good." Long time ago when I first was learning it. But it's as you learn it more that it becomes more and more powerful. That's an indicator of a certain kind of information architecture elegance
Yes.
that you're able to go deeper and deeper, and not be scared off initially.
Right. Right. It's like having an easy on ramp to the tool. If there's a clear path towards increased competence without burning people out, then I think
Right.
you have elegance in design.
Well, a bunch of years ago, when we were before the internet, when hypertext was still a CD-ROM phenomenon, I was designing a thing called the Encyclopedia of Frontier Biography, um, which was a compilation of frontiersmen and Native Americans and a bunch of other folks, and Billy the Kid and Bowie and all those kind of folks. And I was taking that from a print collection to a digital collection, and managed to locate a royalty-free software package that I sent off for and got called Hypervise, and you could hypertext link, which was a remarkable thing at the time, seemingly miraculous. I had to have some symbol to signify a link because we didn't have any visual vocabulary of an
Right.
underline at that point. And so I designed this arrow going off in four directions square, which I put next to things that had a link to that name, or so if there's a name that had an entry, we have that little symbol inside the text saying, "Here's a link." And that's an instance of or an example of sort of how bad our grammar was back then, that we had to interrupt
Yeah.
reading process to say
Right.
there is more information about this.
Well, it's like the foot.
Uh,
It's a footnote. Isn't that the same
yeah.
thing in print?
hmm
You see this little distraction at
Number,
the corner. Yeah, number.
but you very quickly learn to ignore that
Right.
distraction, a little number, which is why they're always little. Is you can ignore it. You don't
Right.
have to interrupt the reading process to know that there is something that you could do. It's just interesting how we are developing vocabularies to enable us to have a different kind of density, a multidimensional density, where you don't have to throw all of it at once into somebody's face, but
Right.
rather can open up into other kinds of options as somebody's needs change.
Yes.
So the design as a whole is something that's both visual, conceptual, is something where it is possible to have elegance. There's some mechanisms like having a good, varied team, talking about these things, being willing to kill your babies. Those are some of the some of the things that are at the heart of it. But also making sure that whatever design of the information products that we're talking about is concerned, that you are aiming it for a reason, that there's a purpose to the choices you're making, and that you're paying attention to utility as well as the visual attractiveness.
Yep. And we are just at the very early stages of figuring out what all of this means for our online existence. What does it mean for ebooks? What does it mean for apps? What does it mean for tablet computers? And what will it mean for the next wave of devices and standards that we'll have?
And as we shift from a primarily mouse-based interface to an audio and gesture-based interface, that will change the vocabulary and change the possibilities, and we'll have to go through yet another round of learning a new vocabulary. So it'll be a really interesting period as we try to design publications going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. You should live in interesting times. I think we can
Yes,
say that we do.
that's right.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
See ya.